Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at cesj.org. Hello again, podcast listeners. Welcome back to the Just Third Way podcast. And I am your host, Dave Hamill. And today we have a special guest, one of our fellow CESJ board members. I say that because I think we've had all the board members on except this hardworking fella named Dan Parker. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Dave.
Dan, I really appreciate you coming on with me today. I've enjoyed all of your input on all of the meetings that we've had through the years, and I've often mentioned it to you, but I've never been able to pull it off because you're one of those kind of guys that works behind the scenes and gets things done and doesn't really try to get credit for it. And I respect that a lot. So thank you very much. Tell us a little bit about your background. I never even asked you, what kind of work you do. I know you're in Canada, but I was curious to know, what you did most of your life and stuff like that.
Well, I'm semi-retired now, Dave. Still working part-time as a computer tech graphic designer, doing a little bit of real estate. All my life, since I was in my early 20s, I was been an entrepreneur. And you know the definition of an entrepreneur?
Oh, no. Someone who does a lot more work than they ever thought they were going to do. How about that?
Well, it's somebody who'll do almost anything to avoid getting a job. But
there you go. Hey, I'm in there. I like that.
But I've really enjoyed the freedom aspect of it, as do all entrepreneurs. Of course, it's a lot more risk involved. And again, work, you can call it work, but it's only work if you think of it that way. I mean, tennis is hard work if you think of it that way, but you can have a lot of fun as well. But I started my career as a Woolworth manager. Started in the stockroom and worked my way up, which is how they do all their management training programs. And I got into retail that way. And then I opened my own little junior department franchise when I was 24 in a small town in northern Alberta. And that got me to Alberta. Woolworth transferred me out here. They had a policy of transferring all their management trainees all over Canada. And I'm from a large family with 10 kids is my background before then. And I got into Woolworths. I took a couple years of university and I couldn't find a summer job. It was one of those depressions which magically appear. And so Woolworth was desperate for somebody to work in this small northern town. And I joined up as a management trainee with intention to go back to university, finish my third year, but I never did. I enjoyed the hands-on work and the learning I was doing on the ground rather than the more esoteric university courses, and just stayed there.
Well, that's kind of my story also, and sort of found myself working hard at times through the lean times. And I think that might be something similar in our thought patterns as to what attracted us to the Just Third Way. I remember I first heard about it around 2010 because that was one of those lean times. We had that 08 bust, and I was trying to figure out why we kept having the boom and the bust, and I was looking for a better money system. And I think that you were actually already involved in it. Did you find out about the Just Third Way because of the financial crisis also?
Well, a financial crisis. It was a different one.
Okay.
And in the 1980s, they had 20% interest rates, 22%, 23% interest rates. And
right.
At that time, I was a new entrepreneur with a junior department store. So, of course, I had a lot of debt. And I would look at the books every month or every week even and see, okay, I'm doing well. I'm have my gross margins where they should be. My revenue's still okay, even though the town's hurting because, Stedman's and Woolworths, they're the less expensive stuff. So they do okay during the slow times. Right. But in that industry, your goal is to make 10 cents on the dollar. You're doing well, after expenses. And the 20% interest rates, I was doing well. Still, I had
where's the money going, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these guys, well, what are they doing for my business?
Yeah,
I don't see
exactly.
them punching in or anything. And so that got me thinking about it. And, I sold out my business. I managed to, just break even and, able to go on to other things. But, that got me thinking about it. And, you talking to the other business people in town and so on, it was all, nobody really had an answer, most of them. It was, the way the media presents it, like, well, it's a thunderstorm. What are you going to do about it? It's a
Right.
natural phenomena, right? But there was a couple of old guys around that clued me in. They said, well, it's not that natural. There's people behind the scenes determining interest rate, and the rationale that time was to drive inflation down because inflation was rising. But if you think about it, inflation is built into the cost of everything we buy. So interest can be a driver of inflation, so,
True.
they did drive it down, but just by, devastating the economy. So it's, a little bit like bleeding the patient, like they used to do when you were sick in the medieval times, right? So,
Right, as if that works.
yeah. And so, that got me thinking about it. And then, it was the late 90s before I really got involved with social credit. And that would be or early 90s, sorry, late 80s to early 90s. In Edmonton, there was people giving talks on it and stuff. And they really gave me the details of how our monetary system really worked, behind the scenes, different from what our mass media is telling us. And of course, Alberta has a long history with monetary reform.
Right.
So, I guess that part of that long history, it's social credit formed the government here for a couple of decades. And that was all about monetary reform.
Right. And I think it would be good to explain that just because we're saying social credit, we're not talking about that thing in China where the government rates people's behavior. That's something totally different, right?
Yes, it is. And I sometimes wonder if the Western press gave that label just to kind of create a little confusion. It's a case of social credit is kind of, under the radar now, but there are still a lot of people from the old time when it was in power still active in it. And of course, the existing money system, it was quite a threat to it at one time, and probably they want to make sure it stays down. They had a New Zealand government interested in it. It went worldwide. It was quite the movement. Of course, this was during the Great Depression, so a lot of people were looking for answers then too.
Right.
And like I say, it actually formed the government in Alberta for decades. We had some federal representatives involved in it as well, and that was all about a totally different monetary system.
So they actually implemented it somewhat in a local area?
No, they tried in Alberta, and it got struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada, saying, monetary matters are a matter of federal responsibility, and
Wow.
provinces were not allowed to do that. They did form a financial institution called Alberta Treasury Branches, that was set up to do that, to create honest money, but they ruled it unconstitutional. And that ATB still exists today, but it operates more as a regular bank. But back in its mandate, it could still be switched back to its original purpose and issue some credits to the general population, or money if it had to.
Okay, so ATB is the actual company name of that bank?
Yeah, Alberta Treasury Branches is the full name.
Okay. So that's almost like a state run bank in that
correct.
province.
That's right, but it operates as a normal bank, unfortunately. Not
see.
like, I guess, if you heard down in the States, you have something called the Bank of North Dakota.
Right.
Which takes more of the original purpose of the ATB. It doesn't take it all the way to what the ATB was supposed to be, but it very much operates differently than the everyday banks, and as a result, North Dakota does quite well. And even during the 2008 crisis you mentioned, if you look back at the figures, they were very, very fortunate there, where that alleviated a lot of those problems because they had their own state bank.
Yes, I have heard very good things about the Bank of North Dakota, and I've looked into it some. And I think some of the reasons why, it's successful and North Dakota is successful have to do with that well-run bank. And I think one, component of it, of course, is they do have the commodity of oil that is readily available there. But I think that has sort of kept some of the people from being corrupt. It's more about it not being corrupt than it is the fact that they have the commodity available to me, So that's my how I look at it anyway.
Yeah, there actually was an analysis on the effect of oil in regards to that, and the person's name, they're a monetary reformer again down in the U.S. By the name of Ellen Brown, who's done a book called Web of Debt.
I'm familiar with Ellen Brown. Yeah, she likes the
Yes.
public banking concept completely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so she did an analysis showing that the oil, she compared it to states that had similar or even better oil incomes, and they didn't do nearly as well as North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
Took
That's
oil
good.
out of the equation there.
Right, right. How about that? Yeah, I wish that we could somehow join up with the Ellen Brown and, Bill Still people and, the ones that are interested in these subjects and, you know, maybe figure out a way to start a movement that wants to test these various proposals in different areas. And just to be specific, if people are listening and wondering about social credit and, we're saying just third way, the just third way is pretty different from social credit. We're talking about, citizens getting an investment credit from the regional Fed or central bank, as, in the case of Canada, and invest in that credit in dividend paying corporations. So that's something that the social credit people, it was a little different, right? I know that I read about the popularity up there had to do with Major C.H. Douglas, who came over from Europe, right? He had some projects and he kind of started the thing, right?
Yes, he started social credit. He wrote some books on it. Interestingly, his first book was entitled Economic Democracy, which is kind of what everybody's looking for in the reform movement.
Right.
Where a few private banks don't have the inside track on creating money from nothing and then charging compound interest on it.
That's
quite
the
rightly,
worst.
Everybody should benefit from that. And I guess where I prefer the just third way over social credit is social credit had a small group of experts at the top, determining how much money should enter the economy, to avoid inflation and so on, which is a good move. And then they would distribute this new money in the form of a national dividend, which is like a basic income in many ways. And where I prefer just third way is the direct connection between the individual and the income and property. Of course, the social creditors, they're very sincere in saying, we're just going to go by the figures. These guys are purely technicians. They're bound to do it by the figures. If this much is figures show this, then that's how much we have to issue, and it has to go to everybody. But you and I both know, I think, the further the distance there is between the process and the individual, the more opportunity there is for the system to become corrupt, where people can sneak in there and play with the figures, play behind the scenes politics to get their people onto the politicians, onto the experts board, who are not looking at just the figures, are looking at various power plays and so on. So that's where I really prefer the just third way, is the connection is so close. It's right there.
Right. Absolutely. And it's interesting. I guess there was some talk back during the heyday of the social credit movement in Canada because of Louis Kelso coming along in the late 60s. In fact, you found a magazine that talked about Louis Kelso's ideas, and back then it was more called inclusive capitalism. I just found it. That's what they were trying to market it as in Canada.
That's a good label as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the only reason we don't use that now in the just third way as much is because capitalism has started to kind of have a bad name in some circles, you know?
Yes, it's like everything, words can change their meaning over time. And, I don't think we've ever had a free market. I mean, how can you have a free market when a very small percentage of the population benefits from money created out of nothing and is able to buy productive assets with it? There's nothing free about that at all.
No, absolutely. And like you say, you got these, mysterious people deciding what things are going to be and doing all kind of stuff. We just need transparency, and we need money created for productive growth that benefits everyone. And unfortunately, it's not real simple. Just wave a magic wand and make that happen. There's a lot of detail that has to go in, and that's where we lose a lot of people, is going into the detail. They're like, that's too complicated, So, but hey, we got to educate, and that's what you're doing. And you're working in Canada, and in fact, you built the Global Justice Movement website, which is really a great tool to reach people all over the world. Has a lot of good information, and not centered on the United States like so many things we're doing here. What is the purpose of the Global Justice Movement, as you call it?
Well, yeah, that's a kind of an umbrella term meant for when there was probably about 10 years ago, there was quite a push to create a more inclusive democracy. And I like to call ours our Global Justice Movement because it started off as the Global Justice Movement. And when I got into it, it was a project that the American organization already had going, Center for Economic and Social Justice in the U.S. there. And there was involved with some British monetary reformers who were working with your organization or our organization in the Global Justice Movement, tapping into this, movement that was going worldwide. And there was quite a few good books written on it, and it gained a lot of interest. And they kind of the British started tending to the aspect of public banking, like Alan Brown, which is, seems a more doable way of creating economic democracy. But again, there's that potential for abuse. You have a small group up there who's deciding, how much you get, rather than you having a direct connection to that productivity. So again, the potential for, power tending to corrupt for this small group being up there. And of course, the tendency also for those that cannot be corrupted to be and run by people with, less scruples, taking their positions and so on, which is, if you study history, you find out that's what generally happens where there's a small elite, utopian group is they don't last. They either get corrupted by the power themselves or by the very nature of that structure. They're sitting ducks for those with less scruples to take over. So that's what I really like about the Just Third Way, is that direct connection. I own the shares of that company. There's no other expert above deciding how much I get. It's on the results of that company. And I do like the idea, though, of there being a backup plan for, let's say, somebody's shares do not do well, then they can still get that regular basic income from a centralized source. But that would just be the small percentage in that case, where, the majority who did invest properly and diversified and so on, they would have that direct connection. Right.
So the website that you built is globaljusticemovement.org, and it does say our Global Justice Movement. So that's good. And and it is about the just third way solution, but uniting people around the world on that subject, right?
That's correct, yes. And I've also brought some other concepts in them to look for synergies as well, such as the Venus Project, which is a very technocratic system, which is another system I studied from technocracy.inc, which is back from the 30s as well. It started. And that's all based on, scientific, resource-based economies.
Right.
And it has a very strong ecological component in that regards for efficiencies. But again, there's a small little group up top running everything where,
Right.
it's only a matter of time before it degenerates, just like, the socialist utopia did in the USSR.
Right. Well, they're also, in my opinion, they're flawed because they're trying to eliminate religion and they're trying to eliminate money, which it's a hard thing to do and still retain freedoms,
Yeah. Like money, of course, is just a symbol, and they would have it in some, form of accounting. Kilowatt hours is one that, has gained a little bit of profile recently and so on. But money itself, I wouldn't say they're trying to eliminate it. They're going to have some accounting mechanism. But again, my thing is that there's no direct connection between you and what's being produced, and how much you should benefit from it. And of course, we're not just talking monetary terms and consumption and so on, but what they can call time affluence. More and more free time to work on the things that really interest you, to spend more time with your family if that's the case, and so on. So equally important, I guess, when we get caught up in these reform movements, is it's not just about getting a more stable, secure income, but also more free time to work on things that go beyond, the day-to-day daily bread, what I think CESJ calls, the lowest form of work, the stuff you need to survive and get on to other forms of work.
I agree with that. And that's one of the problems that I think people maybe who have reached a level of success and have worked hard to get there and are also, I guess, looking at the rest of the world and seeing some people who are lazy and don't want to take care of themselves. And so that's an obstacle. It's sort of a psychological barrier that some people say, well, we don't want to give away anything, and we think that if people have free time, they're just going to get drunk and do stupid things. So I think that, educating our kids about the value of, being constructive with your time, whether you're earning money or not, is an important sort of culture behind the kind of change that we need to see. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think you touched on education a couple times, Dave, and I think that that's important. Even starting, as low as the kindergarten level, where I think Alvin Toffler wrote a book called The Third Wave regarding the needs of the information economy, and said our schools are still largely set up to train people for the industrial age. You call it the hidden curriculum, where they're,
right,
lining up at the sound of a bell and so on. And
yep.
Again, that's part of our job in the money system, is that, people have been so conditioned or indoctrinated to believe that, we have a free system and a free market and so on, that it's such a big jump for them to find out that everything that they've been told by our education and by our mass media is entirely false. And
right.
You'd have to look back at history to see, well, it's tempting. You look back and say, boy, those people were pretty fools. They believed in the flat earth. They believed in this. They believed in that is so obviously wrong. But that's what they were educated on. And that's what, the mass media of the day conditioned people on. And, that's the natural, you can't blame the people for believing, right?
That's true.
So,
That's true.
yeah.
They're being taught that money is what it is, and it's flawed.
Yeah, they have to go through what's really a paradigm shift, which is a very difficult thing to do. To see that money is entirely different from what they've been taught as regards to where it comes from and who it benefits.
Yeah, and it's been scary with the COVID-19 pandemic because it's like we're pushing people toward more, dependent on the government. But there's a large percentage of people who are starting to see that because of this, you can't trust what they're telling you sometimes. They started out telling us one thing and they were absolutely sure of it, and then they changed it to another. And, since you're in Canada, I'd be interested to hear how COVID-19 has affected sentiment, because you guys have the, you know, government health care and things like that. What are people thinking of? Do they feel like they want more government now or less, or can you tell?
Well, I think there's really a split in Canada, where the West wants less government and way less federal government and more, more government that's closer to the people.
Right.
And there's always that element there that does like having a big centralized, strong government at the federal level. And again, I think that's a function of education. And in Canada, they were fast off the mark in giving support to anybody that was unemployed, even if they didn't qualify for unemployment insurance. But that said, the deficit's going right off the scale. I mean, it's been Canada's in more debt than it's ever been in its life, like most countries. And again, that's part of the method of money creation.
Right.
Created out of nothing as debt, as compound interest.
Right.
But, all in all, a very negative attitude towards government in the West. And in the East, I'm not so sure. There seems to be some of it, but it's almost like they haven't been through the socialist nightmare yet. So it's like they want to try it.
Right.
Never mind
right.
what history shows for every other nation, or even even current events in some nations, like, for example, Venezuela and so on.
Exactly. Dan, did you guys have more or less a full shutdown, or was that more just the East Coast?
Well, they had a full shutdown. There was a lot of it was in terms of, it was self-directed, where they would advise you to do things rather than make it against the law. Although there was people getting tickets, like, say, a father rollerblading with his kids far away from anyone. And of course, they were living in the same house. They're given $1,000 ticket for not being.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. For not being in their homes and various things like that, which are just, again, that's where the government lost a lot of credibility. And now there's things are coming out that, the sunshine is so beneficial and there's so, way less risk of communicating the disease or infecting someone outside. But this wasn't even that case. They were there with people that they were in the house with, out enjoying some healthy things, and they were getting fined for it.
Wow. That's ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, looking back, I think that, it's understandable that we had the shutdowns, but I think knowing what we know now, I don't think we would have done it, and personally, I don't think we should have done it, but I respect other people if they think that we should have too. What do you think about the shutdowns?
Well, I think with the information that's come out now, under a certain age group, this very much falls in line with the flu.
Right.
As soon as you bring in the older people, it's quite a bit more serious than the flu. So
yeah, we should protect the older ones.
Dependent. And
right.
Again, I think this one size fits all of big government was devastating for, who knows what the health costs are of people not getting regular checkups or medical care. The depression, the suicides from the economic devastation. And then at the same time, the one size fits all is while they were hampering the people that really didn't need that degree of shutdown, they were not looking after the highest risk group properly. I know as somebody in senior age with a health issue, I still had to go get my own groceries and so on. I mean, the grocery stores on their own initiative had special shopping hours for seniors, but you would think, it's kind of a gauntlet for here's the people that are, way, way higher rates than the ordinary flu at that age group. And the government's doing nothing while they're locking down these other people. And then in the continuing care old age homes, it just verged on, well, I'd have to say it verged on criminal negligence where,
Almost genocide.
well, yeah, 81% of Canada's deaths occurred in continuing care homes. Not as bad as the U.S., which had about a quarter of the deaths in the continuing care homes. Part of that was, they had infected people in the same rooms as uninfected people, and they thought plastic curtains were good enough. Who knows whether they're sharing the bathrooms, and to lock down all the people that were at very low risk and then do this for the people that were at very high risk. To me, that's the one size fits all the government is so good at, and which is so ineffective for so many things. When again, this pulls back to where, we don't need a government up top deciding how much everybody should get for their second income.
That's true.
In addition to their labor. So that was just, it'll be strange what all comes out. And I heard in the States too, that in New York, they were sending seniors back to the old age homes out of hospitals, and they weren't even testing them for COVID.
Yeah, that's become a pretty big source of controversy now. They're saying that, I'm trying to think of the governor's name there. He and his
Cuomo I'm not sure, but yeah,
that's right. Yeah, he's the one that his brother is like a CNN correspondent.
That's right.
Yeah. So they're saying that he screwed that up. So
and I guess one of the lessons out of COVID was just, again, the dangers of big government, like how inefficient they were to almost where they're causing more problems than they're solving.
Right.
If they would have had, and again, all the mix up in communications, if not outright dishonesty about, don't wear a mask, now wear a mask. And I think part of the reason, first thing I thought of when they said a mask can't do any good for you, is I thought, well, then why are all the, medical personnel wearing them, eh? And I thought, well, I bet you they're saying that because they don't want people to scoop up the supply now, when they were in short supply for the medical personnel, instead of just being honest with them. And of course, once that trust is broken, now they come and, it's like the boy that cried wolf, right? Now they tell you to go do this, and people are going, well, they lied to me last time, and even now it makes sense. Don't congregate, mass protests or whatever. People are saying, well, they lied to me last time, they must be lying about this too. So, now we're getting a little bit of a rebound because people have lost faith in the government because again, and that's the corruption inherent of these overly centralized systems.
That's true. And it comes back to individual empowerment. If we had generations of a fair money system that empowered everyone with incomes, we could weather pandemics much better, not only because we would be in a better situation financially to not have to work, but also I think what would evolve over time is more of our sort of delivery systems and, even manufacturing would be more automated. So it's moving humanity toward less of the menial tasks and more of the, I guess, ability to choose what you're doing with your, time on a daily basis. So wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think a lot of what they called essential services where, people were forced to go out to work, would not really be essential in an economy that was automated up to what is easily technologically possible. And in case of Canada, they had, outbreaks at meat packing plants and so on, as they had immigrant people in there fulfilling a lot of these jobs that, Canadians didn't want to do, much the same as many countries. Maybe Israel comes to mind, the U.S. in terms of their illegal immigrants and so on.
Yeah. We have that
and a lot
problem.
of these people, when they come here, they can't afford, they're low paid, so they can't afford to get their own place. So they're packed, they're working all day, and then they come home and they're packed together with, 10 people living in, in a small place.
That's
You know,
true. I hadn't
just
thought
an
of that.
apartment. That's
Yeah.
an, density, of course, is huge on this. And in the case of old age homes, they couldn't make a living at one of them. So they're working at two or three. So, of course, they're traveling between them. And, it's a recipe saying, how do we spread this thing the fastest? Well, here, let's pack all these people in a room and have them travel around to the most at-risk population. That's how we get the most deaths. If you planned it out, I don't know if you'd do much of a better job. And of course,
Well,
I'm
there
not
you
suggesting
go.
that for a minute. I don't think it was, but it was just, again, just the sheer incompetence of top-down systems. It's just amazing in this case and devastating, tragic.
Yeah, and the fact that we do have people who are willing to go around and do these jobs is keeping us from automating a lot of them. So we need your global justice movement, Dan, so we can empower everyone, right?
Yeah, well, like I say, I'm doing my bit, but of course, it's going to take a lot more than one little website. But I do like the idea of, again, I got into this. Somebody else started it. But I do like the idea of expanding it beyond a U.S. Focus group. If you go on your website, there's Abraham Lincoln on the homepage and so on, which is great concept, the capital homesteading, the same as the homesteading that we've had both in the U.S. and in Canada later. But
Right.
for most people in the world, it's it can be a little bit of a barrier saying, well, okay, well, that's
That's the US, yeah.
that's the USA, and they're going to get that system going so they can come over and get our resources cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
There's a
I
lot
can
of
see how
distrust
people
there.
would not trust the United States because
Yeah.
with the dollar backing everything, it's almost like we're exporting the money scam to these other countries. And, God forbid if they want to go against it and have their own system set up. It seems like those are the ones that end up being torn up by war somehow, you know.
Yes,
And
that's correct. Yeah,
I'm
and
not I'm not there, so I can't say for sure that, our corrupt politicians are paying terrorists to fight each other, but I have my suspicions.
well, if you go back again, it's not to demonize anybody, but it's just it's a continuation of history. Whether it be the Roman Empire, or the British Empire, nowadays the American Empire, and a lot of it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If America didn't try to draw as much resources to itself, it wouldn't be militarily as strong. In which case, there's always China and Russia, chomping at their tail.
Yeah,
So they're almost forced to do that to stay stronger than their rivals. So again, this is where I get into the idea of the global justice movement, get a more effective world governing bodies in terms of solving these problems of war is the ultimate one, of course. But right now, in the world as it is, with the UN largely ineffective and becoming more ineffective, the more co-opted it becomes and more corrupt it becomes. If the U.S. doesn't do that, and China continues making inroads into Africa and so on, etc., then of course the more resources they have, the stronger they get. And all of a sudden now, they have a bigger navy than America, and of course, the nuclear weapons is kind of putting a whole new spin on that sort of thing. But for all the proxy wars and so on, look what happened to Russia when they didn't. They went into a country and the standard of living went up, whereas when America often goes and the standard of living went down, resource extraction. And Russia wasn't able to keep up. They didn't have as much wealth flowing in from the outside to keep up in the arms race, and we all know what happened there.
right. Yeah, that is the big dynamic to see what's going to happen with China and Russia in particular. And my hope is that the sort of over, I don't know, overstepping the bounds of normal control by the government of, China, they've just they've just gone, way off the charts in terms of, civil rights and not leaving people a choice, that they're controlling all the big businesses. I think that is one of the best opportunities for the people to strike back and say, no, we're not doing this anymore, because there's so many people, and hopefully we can get some of these ideas to them, because really we should be leading the way, obviously, over here, but I think that it might come from there. The people of China, and it's just kind of the feeling that I'm getting right now.
I'd say, any of the major powers, when I include Russia, I mean, just simply because of its nuclear capability, and they're also coming back quite strong in other ways.
True.
But it's something that they've all got to be. It can't just be one nation, I don't think, anymore in the future. It's been kind of a natural progression from, smaller communities up to, city states, up to nation states. And I think more and more they have to get these, world bodies where they're not so much conditioned on a hidden plan, but more transparent. So, they can become more democratic that way. But China, yeah, again, and there's a reason I think that the people, it's a natural human essence to want more and more individual personal freedom. And, when they're lacking that, it's not going to last, whatever it is.
Right.
Part of that is, again, the top down approach is ineffective. I mean, we've seen it. COVID again was a great example of that, of what happened to the old age homes and so on in Canada. There it was. The government has oversight over all those homes, and it just failed horribly. But even outside of the homes, even as a senior, we had no protection in terms of going out to getting the essentials, whereas the people that were at very low risk could not work.
Right.
So to me, that's just it's one size fits all. Horribly devastating to the economy, devastating to the fatality rate. The worst of both worlds, because they had one size fits all.
That's true.
I don't know. It's a very rare person that doesn't want more and more control over their own life, and we don't want to get into this too much, maybe, but I think a lot of that has to do with a higher power, whatever you want to, call it, whether it's in the form of organized religion or not, or just a spiritual awakening. Is that there is higher power, higher intelligence out there that doesn't communicate well through these organizations that are based on, say the lower urges of people seeking personal power and so on, which is so temporary anyways. It is kind of silly in a way, but it is affecting a lot of the people that want to develop further, being under the control, and especially in China, like as you say, being under their thumb sort of thing.
Right. And I totally agree. You're right. We need a spiritual awakening. I've seen it, here, that in fact, the shutdown of the churches has been a bad thing, in my opinion. So I think the average, age and younger people should be getting in groups, and that's going to build the herd immunity. But we need to get together and be able to worship. We need to have spirituality flourish, because we need freedom with responsibility. It's kind of like what I was saying, where people are worried, well, if you have a giveaway and people don't have to work, then they're just going to get drunk and stuff like. Well, sooner or later, they're going to realize every person has to have a purpose, and it has to be for good, and that's where you find it, and helping each other and moving humanity forward and doing something positive. So I think you and I definitely agree on that.
Yeah, and it's like you say, some people are going to fall into that right away because it's the first time they've really had that freedom, and they don't know how to handle it, much like a teenager. And social credit dealt with that very much, and they called it damage, social damage that had to be repaired, because they said it was, our current system has damaged people by making them so reliant on higher powers and so on, and damaged people in keeping them, debt, enslaved to debt in many regards, and having to work at things they didn't want to work at, and just to pay their their debt. And a lot of these things, if you look at it with our society, a lot of these things don't create anything that most people would consider wealth. They could probably get rid of about 80 or 90% of the people communicating to these big cities, heating and air cooling these big towers, shuffling paper and creating bureaucracies and so on. If you got rid of them all, the standard of living would probably stay just the same. Well, I'm sure it would. It would stay just the same, and if not even go up, because all
Right.
these resources that they're churning and burning simply to get money to pay their debt. And
Right.
again, very, very beneficial to the environment as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting buzzword, social damage, because you could certainly, see it when you look for it. It's there. That's a good point. It's great to hear the insight of a fellow just third way person in Canada.
Now, it's a pleasure talking to you, Dave.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, and thanks for your efforts on creating this. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. You can join CESJ by going to cesj.org and clicking on participate, and you can become a paying member for $25 per year, and also a student membership is $15 per year, and that qualifies you for discounts on our materials such as books, which you can buy many of and distribute to your friends and family. And also, if you'd like to participate and comment on the podcast, feel free to call. I have a voicemail set up. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll play it on the podcast. The number is 678-719-2840. Own or be owned.